Okay, hello everyone. This video is the first video for chapter 8. Okay, in chapter 8, we're gonna look at how did Singapore become an independent nation. All right, so what are we going to cover in this next few videos? You can look at the chapter at a glance here. Basically, we're going to learn why did Singapore want to merge with Malaya in 1963? Why did some people don't want to merge, okay, to have Singapore merge with Malaya? Okay, and the last part I think is more important. Okay, why did Singapore separate from Malaysia? The third point maybe not so important, in between. Usually it's quite a small thing, but I'll just go through as well. Okay, so these are the main focus. So this first video, we're gonna focus on why did Singapore want to merge with Malaya in the first place? Or more specifically, why did the PAP government in Singapore wanted to pursue a merger with Malaya? Okay, so for this factor, this big question, there are two main reasons. You can see very clearly the reasons are labeled here with the header. So I'll go through one by one. Okay, so the first reason why the PAP wanted to merge is we will get our independence. Why do I say merger is necessary for independence? Okay, because we want to get our independence from the British. Remember, in 1959, even though the locals are governing basically the whole of Singapore already, but the British was still around. The British was in charge of the defense of the country. Okay, so the British was still hanging around Singapore. So the PAP did not really want that. They promised the locals, I'm going to get the British out of Singapore, right? So to get the British out of Singapore, we need the British to be willing to leave Singapore. However, the British was very fearful. Fearful of what? They're very fearful that countries like Singapore will fall under communist control. So you can write down and say fear of communism. The British was very worried that Singapore would not stand up to this group of people called the communists who wanted to take over the country by force. Okay, and the communists are getting successful in places like Vietnam and Indonesia and in China, obviously. Okay, and the British was very scared. They said Singapore is not ready to be independent because the communists might take over the country, and the British don't want that. So what does this got to do with merger? Okay, so to keep Singapore safe, okay, basically Malaya will keep SG safe. If Singapore merge with Malaya, big country, they can protect small Singapore. And the British will be more willing to let Singapore go, to let Singapore be independent because they know the Malayan will take care of the Singaporeans. Okay, so the first reason for merger is the British will let Singapore be independent because Malaya will keep Singapore safe from the communists. That's the first reason. Okay, the second reason and more important reason is economic survival. Okay, if Singapore merge with Malaya, Singapore's economy will survive. Some of the reason why we will survive, you can see from source one, okay, produce rubber and tea. You can write down resources. Malaya gives resources for Singapore, things like rubber, tin, even water and food that Singapore is quite short of. Malaya can provide these things for Singapore to survive. Okay, what about some other economic survival reasons? Okay, so for this page, okay, we are going to look into more specific ways how Singapore's economy will survive. Because just now we mentioned how Singapore lack natural resources, right? We have very little resources to grow our own things. Okay, and the worst thing is we need to create jobs because the population is getting very big, growing population, short of jobs. So there were a lot of job shortage. There were things like resource shortage. So Singapore wasn't doing very well. Okay, and you can see that in the first paragraph, neighbors were becoming independent. They wanted to export their goods through their own ports. So Singapore's importance as a trading port fell. So Singapore's trade has fallen in the 1950s and 1960s. Okay, to make things worse, the Malayan government introduced this thing called a tariff. Okay, what does a tariff do? You can look at this diagram here. If I sell a thing in Singapore, say $10, but I want to sell it in another country like Malaya, they will put a tax on it. Okay, so Singapore goods suddenly become very expensive if they sell in Malaya. And what does this mean? People wouldn't buy Singapore goods. People will want to buy Malayan goods. Singapore business will go down. Okay, so to prevent this from happening, to prevent the Singapore businesses from being taxed, they wanted to create a common market. Common market, okay, will remove the tariffs on Singapore goods, will remove the taxes on Singapore goods. Okay, this will lead to more trade, more business for Singapore. So this is the two reasons why Singapore, the PAP government wanted to merge with Malaya. First, is the only way for the British to let us go. Second, is for our economy to survive and prosper, because Malaya can give us resources, give us jobs, they can get rid of the tariffs, give us a common market to improve our trade and businesses. All right, so that will be the first part of this chapter. In the next video, we look at Malaya's response a little bit more. All right, that will be for the next video.